Authorities only announced Griner's detention earlier this month, 2 weeks after arresting her, after allegedly finding hash oil in one of her bags at an airport in Moscow. She could face 10 to 20 years in prison under Russian law. Now, Griner has been playing in Russia since 2014. Like many members of WNBA, she plays there to supplement her income. As we covered last week on our show, financial opportunities in the U.S. for WNBA players are often far less lucrative than those available to their NBA counterparts. Now, a few details have emerged since news of Griner's detention became public. This is in part due to her family's desire to maintain privacy for the sake of her protection. But her detention is deeply concerning. Amid Russia's violent invasion of Ukraine and the United States' subsequent sanctions, diplomatic relations between the two nations are particularly fraught. Griner is from Houston, Texas, and after learning about her detention on March 5th, House Representative Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas spoke bluntly about the situation.
I don't want to disregard a sovereign nation, but Putin has disregarded sovereign nations his entire service in this world. Anyone that is killing and attacking and destroying Ukraine, their neighboring country that is not bothered has no right to hold this right, period.
And while Brittney Griner is the most high-profile American citizen currently detained in Russia, the State Department has been working for several years to try to earn the release of 2 other Americans being held in Russian prisons. As Secretary of State Antony Blinken mentioned when he was asked about Griner earlier this month.
With regard to the individual you mentioned, there's only so much I can say given privacy considerations at this point. Let me just say more generally, whenever an American is detained anywhere in the world, we of course stand ready to provide every possible assistance. And that includes in Russia. As you know, and we've talked about this for a long time, we've been seeking the release of Paul Whelan and Trevor Reed for some time, both of whom are unjustly detained.
And of course, there's also the fact that Griner is a black, openly queer woman in a country that is hostile to LGBTQ+ people. Here she is speaking at the GLAAD Media Awards in 2013, the year she came out publicly as gay.
Growing up, I always knew I wanted to do something big in the world, kind of, a place. And I never knew sports was going to be my outlet, but, with sports, I have a lot of media attention and a lot of spotlight on me. And I'm able to use that for something that's close to my heart, that's close to me.
As we continue to monitor Brittney Griner's detention, we wanted to talk with someone who knows firsthand what it's like being unjustly detained abroad. Jason Rezaian is the host of the Spotify original podcast 544 Days and executive producer of the Washington Post opinion film Renee Hall. Jason, welcome back to Takeaway.
Thanks for having me back, Melissa. It's such an important conversation. I appreciate you talking about it.
Brittney's been detained now for at least a month. Should we be saying that she's being held hostage? What is the right way for us to frame this moment?
So it's a really good question, and one that I think the diplomatic speak that the government uses doesn't help clarify. Americans, like citizens of other countries, are routinely arrested when traveling abroad, oftentimes on legitimate charges, or charges that on the surface may have some merit. In the case of Brittney Griner, we don't know exactly what's true and what's not true. But even if there is merit to the initial charge, we've seen in some cases that the detention evolves into sort of political leverage against the U.S. So it's hard to say if this is being qualified as a wrongful detention by the State Department standards yet. But if they do make that determination, my default is to call that a state detention. So Paul Whelan and Trevor Reed, the other 2 Americans who we know of who are being held in Russia right now, have been deemed wrongfully detained. So by my metrics, they're state hostages.
Given your own experiences, what are you most concerned about for Griner right now?
Well, first of all, the fact that it was Russian media, media attached to the state, that announced her detention, puts those trying to free Britney in a compromised position. Russia has taken control of the narrative, right? And we can say whatever we want to outside of Russia demanding her release, but the dominant story is that this person has been arrested and detained on charges that are against Russian law. We don't know if that's true or not. That's just what Russia says. So, you know, the U.S. government, her family, the WNBA, already on their back feet, flat-footed in this case. Second, we understand that she's being denied consular access. She's not had the opportunity to speak with any officials from the U.S. government who represents citizens' affairs in Russia. And that's a major red flag. We have no idea what's going on and what might be done to her while she's in prison. And for me, as someone who spent 544 days in prison in Iran, the first 49 of which were in solitary confinement in a cell that was 8 feet by 4 feet, where the lights were on 24 hours a day. The only time I was out of the cell was to be relentlessly interrogated. I understand that they could be doing a whole host of things to her, and we have no oversight or insight into those.
We have, as a team, gone back and forth about whether or not to talk about this publicly. Is there danger to shining the media light on this? Are U.S. diplomats better able to work towards release without public attention, or is it critical that we keep public attention on the story?
I fall in the camp that says that public attention is important for several reasons. One, the more attention that a detainee of a foreign government gets, the likelihood of them being treated better goes up. Two, the likelihood that the U.S. government is going to intervene forcefully and do whatever they can to bring that person home increases the more pressure that's on them to do their jobs. I understand the arguments against media attention, but what I'll say is that in this case, we're talking about an international celebrity, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, routinely listed in the top handful of players in the history of women's basketball, has millions of fans in the United States, and potentially even more in Russia, where she plays and has played for the past 7 years. So this is not something that was that we could keep secret, and it's also not something that Russia is keeping secret, because they announced her arrest and published a mugshot of her on television. You know, I understand that in certain instances, when the news has not broken, it may make sense to keep it quiet, but that's not the case here. Cat's out of the bag.
What do you make both of the timing of the arrest and the timing of Russian authorities making that detention public?
So, you know, I think that they potentially had a plan to arrest Britney, did arrest Britney, kept it under wraps, until which time the U.S. allies began to ramp up sanctions against Russian authorities and wealthy individuals. You know, it smacks of political motivation to me. And I will continue to look at it through that lens until someone proves otherwise.
I suppose for me, you made this key point around the professional identity, around her fame, her skill. What should we be considering relative to what we know about Russia and LGBTQ plus rights?
Much has been made about Russia's anti-queer approach and the laws that have been passed in that country. I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a Russia expert. But when you have someone who is from a community that is legally persecuted by the country that's holding them, the possibilities of abuse go up exponentially. I think we should be, as Americans, calling for her release, no matter what community we belong to. That's the right thing to do. But I do think that we should all try and put ourselves in Britney's shoes and realize that silence is not necessarily the way to support her.
Do you have a sense of, obviously you are not yourself a U.S. diplomat, but I'm wondering, again, based on both your experience and your reporting, are there things that either the U.S. could be doing or that U.S. media or U.S. citizens could be doing in this moment that might increase the likelihood of release?
Look, I saw this week that a change.org petition has gone up and tens of thousands of people have already signed it. I know in my case there was about 500,000 signatures ultimately on the petition that my brother put up. And that kind of quantifies for stakeholders in the government how important this is to people, right? People can pick up the phone and call their representatives. They can call the State Department. But I think at the end of the day, in the media, the important thing for me, you won't read a story by Jason Rezaian that repeats the allegations against Brittany Griner. I think when we do that, we're doing her a great disservice. We are taking the narrative of her captors that has not been proven to be true, and repeating them in a way and in formats that she cannot counter. And as someone who was, accused of espionage, supposedly by an adversarial government, without any basis in fact, I bristle every time I go back and read those articles about me from 7 years ago when colleagues, some of them friends, used those allegations against me in their headlines.